A great journey has begun. A journey about America, about the open road, about freedom, about history, about adventure. My friends, we're back on old Route 66, which is now properly old, 100 years old as of this year, the year of our Lord 2026. And today, our adventure begins here at one of the most legendary roadside attractions existing in the modern day, along the old Mother Road, the main street of America, Route 66. Just here along the old road on the outskirts of Barstow, California, Elmer Long's Bottle Tree Ranch. Now, Route 66 stretches for nearly 2,500 miles from Chicago to LA, or in my case, coming from Southern California, LA to Chicago. But rather than starting from the Santa Monica Pier or from Los Angeles or a whole bunch of urban sprawl near to where I live and exist every day, we've come out here to the Bottle Tree Ranch to begin our journey. Not only because it's sitting here right outside of Barstow, the sort of last bastion of civilization before you get to those wide open desert drives on your way to Arizona, but also because it's the first truly otherworldly stop. It lets you know this isn't just any other ordinary road trip. The Mother Road, Route 66, is something special. I mean, just look at this place. It is freaking epic, and there's nothing else quite like it anywhere in America or anywhere else on Earth. And everything you see here was created by one guy, a little old man who was living out here for many years, a fella I got quite friendly with before he sadly passed away, Elmer Long Jr., who grew up in Southern California. I believe his dad was in the aviation business, and they used to go out and collect old bottles and old junk. When Elmer got out here to the desert, was able to purchase this home. Yes, there is a home here behind all these bottles, right along old Route 66, in between working at the nearby concrete mine and concrete plant. He took his love of junk and created one of the coolest roadside attractions in America, which thankfully is still standing out here. All of this began roughly around the year 2000. And so really, this was all created in the 21st century, believe it or not. It looks like your classic old roadside attraction or some wacky piece of art you would see from the 20th century. Route 66 is only 100 years old this year, which means the Bottle Tree Ranch has really only existed for a quarter of that time. And yet, for my money, it is one of the most classic, most iconic attractions along the entire Mother Road, and it's right down here in the Southern California desert, and thankfully still available for travelers like me and you and my son London, who's out here with me to enjoy. Now hopefully that remains the case for a very long time, but as I kind of alluded to, Elmer Long himself passed away in 2019 of lung cancer, which of course made everybody worry about the fate of the Bottle Tree Ranch. All we heard was that his son had taken over the Bottle Tree Ranch, his son Elliot. And then we didn't hear anything for a long time. The gates have remained open. It was pretty clear that somebody was living in Elmer's old house at the very back of the property. Only recently have we gleaned any new information because Elliot Long, Elmer Jr.'s son, has done an interview with a newspaper called the SF Gate about inheriting this roadside attraction here, and unfortunately, how kind of miserable it is. So on the one hand, he's kept it open. He wants to honor his father's legacy, but on the other hand, you can imagine growing up and going out to dumps and finding old artifacts and stuff like this, and then watching his father create all of it, and then having to maintain all of this, having to come out here and to see it. You can imagine, you know, that would almost prolong your grief forever in a way. So he's recently broken his silence about that and also given us a little more insight into just how difficult it is to keep this place open. The Bottle Tree Ranch does not now and has never really charged admission, right? This was all the crazy, wacky vision of one guy, of Elmer Long himself, sitting out here in the desert and putting together chains of old bones and combining all these crazy pieces of junk and artifacts into his bottle trees and into the bottle tree forest. But if you look around, it's pretty difficult to maintain this, right? First of all, you get 100-mile-an-hour winds out here. Eventually the bottles will wear out and break. So they've got to be replaced over time and maintained. You've got to keep the weeds cut down and the grass low and as much of the glass off the ground as you can. And as we learned in the article, he does have a caretaker, somebody on the property living in the house who's able to kind of do those things and take care of them. Because Elliot, and I don't really blame him for this, didn't want to move into his dad's old house and make this his full-time life, right? He had a life of his own. And yet, other than the occasional donation left out here, there's really no source of income to keep the Bottle Tree Ranch going. In fact, as I stand out here today, I do remember there being some kind of box to leave donations in, but I don't see anything like that at the moment. So it's like a fascinating insight right into the blessing of like all this still existing, his father's legacy going on, and also the curse of being saddled with it and wanting to keep it going, and then the practical realities of it. It's been out here for 26 years now, which means it's been visited by countless travelers along Route 66, immortalized in documentaries and videos and articles and even, you know, several books. And yet it underlines just how special it is to realize just how easily a place like this could disappear, right? The visionary, the artistic genius behind it could pass away, and then how do you pay the property taxes? How do you pay to keep it cleaned up, keep it open to the public? What if there's an accident? You could sell merchandise, you could ask for donations, but if the traffic isn't heavy enough and people aren't generous enough, it just might not survive. So the point of saying all that is, we really can't take places like this for granted. The time to see something is when it's there and in that spirit. Even though London and I just did a father-son trip down Route 66 2 years ago, we're back to do it again, this time for the centennial year, the 100th anniversary celebration of Route 66 and the entire numbered US highway system, which we'll get into at a later point in this series. And we're gonna see just what there is to see on Route 66 in its 100th anniversary year, see the new attractions, dive into some of the old history, explore some of the small towns on America's Main Street, and hopefully see some familiar faces and make some new friends in the process. Dude, I've always loved Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch. And like I said, when Elmer was out here, back in the day, I had many long conversations with him, no pun intended, about the years that he worked out here in the concrete plant or the concrete mine. Sometimes he used to sit out here and actually work on some of the pieces of art that we're seeing all around us. His little sort of outdoor workshop is now kind of chained off and preserved, and can now walk around it and kind of see where he would sit and look at his forest of bottle trees and get inspiration. But look at this. He would collect all kinds of different junk, right? Like you mostly think of the bottle trees themselves and also some of those telegraph trees. Look at that thing. But it was the junking, the scrapping, the collecting of each little nut and bolt and strange piece of metal. He would tell me about how he would go to like dumps and scrap yards and garage sales and roadside, you know, piles of refuse. And like many of the other legendary creators of sort of roadside art like this, where any normal person would just see maybe a wagon full of scrap to be recycled, Elmer could see how that metal junk could become pieces of artwork. Oh, by the way, while I'm back here, for the record, look at this. Here's where the donation well moved to. It's all the way in the very back of the property. So if you come out here and you're only about, I don't know, 2 hours away from Disneyland, make a little donation into the well. Look at this high voltage tree here. You got the glass insulators, you have ceramic insulators hanging from wire, an old gear up there, all kinds of wire bits and metal bits. Each individual piece is just a piece of trash, but when you string it all together, it becomes something else. It becomes art. And look at this. This is Elmer's, literally his front yard. He's got pieces of scrap metal forming bugs out here. There's Tonka trucks. There's bottle fountains and sculptures and old stoves and pedal cars and ride-along things. You can see over there on top of the old chicken coops, there's like a train made out of weird old pieces of wood. Some of this stuff he welded together himself. Other stuff he just sort of collected and assembled together. And it's hard to know without him here anymore what exactly is what, but I love it. I love that it all kind of feels like one whole, right? When you sweep your eyes over the whole panorama, it all seems to make sense somehow with itself, and yet there is no strict rule. Like, look at this. You can have a metal teapot on top, an old bottle, a hubcap with glass insulators, a windmill or two, an old rusty satellite dish with a bottle, of course, right there on the transmitter or the receiver. You got an old rusty locker, a bunch of old rusty jars. Just in this shot right here, I can see an old sewing machine, an old wagon, an old animal horn, an old toy rifle, bedsteads, clamps, whatever the heck this thing is. There is literally everything you can imagine out here, and the kitchen sink. Just look at that. It's the old engines with bottles on them, the old typewriters with bottles on them. I love how the base for this, he welded a chain around the bottom, and look at that. There's even a little bottle tree action on the stem itself. There's the weirdest stick your face through it and make a fun pick opportunity objects in the world. Speaking of this, I'm fairly confident that this isn't just a cutout for taking pictures in. This is probably an outhouse seat, knowing Elmer. Got old lanterns, the backs of old stoves. Elmer Long was sincerely one of a kind, and yet he was working in sort of an old folk art tradition, and one that actually had some local roots as well, because back in the 1950s, not far away, back towards Hesperia, California, towards Los Angeles a little ways, a man named Miles Mahan bought a couple of acres along old Route 66 and started to build his own cactus garden, which included some bottle trees just like these. In fact, I asked Elmer about it one time, and he said those definitely inspired the creation of, or partially inspired the creation of his bottle trees out here. And back in Victorville at the Victorville Route 66 Museum, they actually have a lot of the artifacts from Mahan's half acre, or Hulaville as it was later called, because of a giant sign of a hula girl. And yet, of course, after his passing in 1995, it didn't take long for that place to deteriorate and for the property to be sold and for artifacts and just bits and pieces of it to survive in museums. And sadly, that is the normal sort of life cycle for visionary projects like this. They don't often outlive the actual visionary behind them, because I mean, come on, Elmer was a one-of-a-kind guy, and who are you gonna get to come out here and live alongside the railroad tracks, watching the trains go by, and devote and dedicate their life to maintaining and growing a bottle tree ranch? Luckily, this bottle tree ranch is close enough to civilization that one could hope, right, that it still continues on far into the 21st century, maybe the 22nd century. But it's definitely important not only to support the art you love and the artists behind them, but when it comes to any physical attraction like this, to go out as much as you can and appreciate it as much as you can while you've got it. I love how you have everything from miniature gardens to these weird hubcap or wheel-made sundials, preserved pieces of history really, and the junk topping each of the bottle trees. Old cars, old signs, old wagon wheels even that would have been destined for the dump a long time ago if one creative genius didn't snatch them up and put them to epic good use. Anyway, thanks to Elliot and the caretaker living on the property who we chatted with for a little bit earlier. Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch is still open to the public every day right along old Route 66 in Helendale, California, just south of Barstow. If you are in and around Southern California this year, 2026, make sure to stop by, say hello for us. It is epic that this place is still here for the time being, and long may it rain. I didn't mean to start the video off with a sermon or such sort of deep reflections as we begin our journey, but we got up rather late today. We had one of those grumpy scrambles. Right? No, grab that. Did you remember this? Oh, this, that, and the other. Oh, hold on, I gotta go to the bathroom. Grab this. And so we made this our first stop precisely because I wanted to remember and keep it in mind to appreciate what we come across when we come across it. Take nothing for granted and enjoy the open road. And there's certainly gonna be a lot of open road ahead for us today, because after we get through Barstow, which is basically just around the corner, just up ahead, we're gonna have many, many miles of desert to cross tonight. Just look at this. Once you're out of LA and San Bernardino, things really begin to open up, even between Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch and Barstow, California, the next town over, which looks so close together on a map. Just got so much open desert. And it is littered with history along the side of the road, but I mainly just think about how dry and desolate it is, and how driving through this in a Model T or an open top old car like that with no air conditioning, it must have been a heck of a journey. And keep in mind that for most people going Chicago to LA, California was at the end of your journey, right? The golden paradise at the end of the rainbow. And people would travel all 2,400 something miles of Route 66, get to the California border and be like, yay, green, luscious paradise. And then encounter what? More and more and more endless miles of desert. Coming from back east, you can only imagine how wearying this would be. Just more desert, and even when the map is showing you're getting closer to LA, you're getting closer to the ocean, closer to Disneyland, this is all you're seeing for mile after mile. And the same holds true in reverse when you're leaving from Southern California, from the paradise of the beach and Disneyland and everything. You got a lot of desert to cross, a lot of familiar home turf desert if you live down here, before you get out to that kind of romantic open road, right? Anyway, as you can now see, we are approaching the outskirts of Barstow, California, one of the towns from the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66. It's sort of our California version of Mos Eisley, right? You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. At least that's the way many people feel about this town. I've always liked driving through Barstow, mostly because Route 66 does go right through the middle of town. There's so many layers of history going all the way back to the old mining and prospecting days, the railroad days, the Route 66 highway era. It is true that the town overall has seen better days. But you know what? Nothing's certain but death and taxes. Barstow could always spring back. And it is still a classic Route 66 stop, which is why they've got things like this, the Route 66 Motel. Now, I've never stayed out here at the Route 66 Motel, mostly because I only live like 2 hours from here, right? So why would I bed down in Barstow? Whenever I drive by, I always love that they've got all these old classic cars out here, lots to look at and take fun pics with. Nods to sort of the local Old West history out here. Look at them logs. Hey, somebody had to drag those telegraph poles and telephone poles out through the desert. All up and down Route 66, you had hundreds, thousands of motels built along the corridor between Los Angeles and Chicago, because especially in 1926, when the route started, a motel wasn't even something people had thought of, right? A lot of people would just camp next to their Model T if they couldn't get into a town that had an established old school hotel. So the auto campground, the little auto cottages, the auto courts, which are sort of like little cottages with maybe garages attached, and then eventually the classic roadside motel. Those things were all invented to cater to travelers on that original US highway system. And from that time, the 1920s through basically the 1960s, maybe into the 1970s, that was sort of the heyday of the American road trip. They were very popular. That's what families did until airfare got cheaper, gas got more expensive, and then the kind of family road trip sort of died off as a cultural institution, meaning over time you needed less and less motels along the highways. Cars could go a lot further on a tank of gas, all that kind of stuff. And so nowadays you have hundreds, even thousands of old motels just abandoned across America, turned into old apartments or just kind of rotting out there, or turned into crappy discount motels. But then you have these all up and down the Mother Road, old converted auto courts, much like this one. You can see there's a couple of the original garages preserved. Each level would have had its garage and its hotel room. Later, most of the garages were walled in and turned into second rooms, right? So they could double the occupancy and you just park your car outside in the parking lot. So I love whenever some of these original auto court garages survive and they put old cars into them, or like this, old photos on the wall, old displays for people to check out. Yeah, as I was saying, all up and down the Mother Road today, you have all kinds of preserved old auto courts and motels, some that never went out of business, right? They were lovingly preserved by staying in operation, and others that were revived over the years to cater to the Route 66 traveler. And this one right here, the Route 66 Motel in Barstow, is usually a classic right before you make your way down into LA stop for a lot of travelers coming from Chicago. Like I said, I've never personally stayed out here at this one. I'd like to sometime. I've never seen the insides of the rooms, which, by the way, all have little Route 66 plaques. That's kind of the door numbers right there. Look at that. I have heard good things, and I love any old roadside motel like this that puts out old cars, old signs, old gas pumps, and gives you a little flavor of the old heyday of the American road trip. Look at that car right there. That is gorgeous. Gosh, look at the tail on her. Look at those beautiful fins. Look at the tail lights. How sick is that? Very Jetsons, very atomic age. Anyway, I'm getting distracted by the old cars and the hand-painted murals outside along old Route 66 out here on the street. Route 66 is mural crazy, right? You always have the 8 states of Route 66 in mural form: Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. You always see those states represented. You always see the highway, lots of recurring themes in Route 66 murals. Route 66 is mural crazy, and I don't hate it. Now, the Route 66 Motel isn't the only game in Barstow. Look at this, you got the torches next door over here. A little less interesting in terms of old cars parked inside, but the mural action out on the street is very good. Look at this guy on the bucking bronco right there. Then look at the mural on the side under the old water wagon, Main Street USA, from Chicago to LA. Anyway, as I said, I'm getting distracted by the old neon signs and the old roadside motels. We still got a lot of ground to cover. And this isn't even what I stopped in Barstow for, so I guess we better scurry on to our next destination. It's just outside of the old downtown Barstow proper, just across the tracks, as a matter of fact, is not only one of the wonders of the Mother Road, but a place I always stop at before I begin my big Route 66 journeys, Casa del Desierto. This is an old historic Harvey house. Harvey houses were sort of the big, fancy railroad hotels and stations scattered along the route by a guy named Fred Harvey in partnership with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. He's sort of the man responsible from turning rail travel into this haphazard kind of dirty thing into a very fine luxury style of travel that would serve only the finest foods in the Harvey House restaurant. And they promoted a lot of the early southwestern tourism to places like the Grand Canyon or a lot of the stops that would eventually become part of Route 66, right? Santa Fe, New Mexico, for example. And most importantly, instead of showing up at some old, dilapidated, Old West hotel full of dudes spitting in spittoons, the Harvey houses were famously staffed by young women, in particular, beautiful young women known as the Harvey girls in spotless black and white uniforms. London just went inside to look for a Harvey girl. He is, in fact, single, ladies. Alas, though, the Harvey girls are a thing of the past. There is some kind of event going on inside this, some kind of birthday party or something for other girls, so we're not going to poke our nose into that. But look at this, on the outside, they got some pictures, some of the Harvey girls in their beautiful uniforms. And there's Fred Harvey in all his pixelated glory right there in the window. Obviously, passenger train travel was a big deal all the way up through both world wars and then even into the 1950s and 60s. A lot of people did their cross-country traveling by train, but really things like Route 66 and the Great American Road Trip did slowly start to kill off railroad travel and things like the Harvey houses. And even though this is used as sort of an event center and also has an Amtrak station today in 2026, ironically, it gets a massive bulk of its visitors from Route 66 travelers. Anyway, normally when there's not some kind of private event, kind of private party going on here, you can kind of wander around inside the station. They got a lot of information about Harvey houses and the Harvey girls. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of ancillary buildings here, right? Like there's a whole bunch of extra space that they are not using today for a train station. And the other reason that this location became famous for Route 66 travelers, that for many years, the old railroad station held inside of it the Barstow Route 66 Museum. But when London and I came here in 2024, the Route 66 Mother Road Museum, as it was called, was all closed down and abandoned. So of course, on our first adventure in 2024, when we did the whole of Route 66 back and forth before he graduated high school, one of our first episodes had to start with, oh, what a bummer. Barstow has closed their Route 66 museum, but now, look at this! In the very same space where 2 years ago it permanently closed, the Mother Road Museum has reopened in time for the centennial year, the 100th anniversary of Route 66. And peeking through the window here, you can see once again it is full of old historic cars and wagons and all kinds of historical information about the Mother Road. Unfortunately, although there's an open flag in the window over there, we did reach this museum far too late to go inside today. But here's the good thing, right? We live in Southern California. We're leaving to head to Chicago. And of course, we're gonna have to travel back to Southern California because that is our home. So we've got more chances. I just think it's ironic that even when it's reopened, the museum is closed when London and I come through town once again. Oh well, that's our own fault. By the way, getting over here from modern downtown Barstow and from the popular Route 66 portion of Barstow, you have to cross over this bridge. And if you saw my previous end-to-end Route 66 series going all the way back to 2017, 18, 19, whenever I filmed any other Route 66 adventures out this way, I came out to the Casa del Desierto, we had to cross the ricketiest, scariest old metal bridge ever in the history of the universe. The First Avenue Bridge, built sometime in the early 1930s, one of the original Route 66 bridges that crossed specifically the tracks here. It was sort of one of the key features of the area, but now look at this. They've replaced it with this new, impressive, modern, open-topped concrete bridge. Apparently the old metal bridge could not be preserved except for a big old chunk of it, which now sits alongside the Casa del Desierto right here along the tracks in Barstow, just a couple of feet from the old Route 66 museum. Dude, now that was a busy bridge and very narrow. It also felt very short when you were driving across it. That top metal bar felt closer to your head than it looks like as I'm standing out here. Anyway, it was not the kind of bridge that you could get out and just walk on, right? Or stop and look at. It always felt so rickety and sketchy. And I gotta tell you, now, getting up close and personal with it, it doesn't look any safer to me than it was. And I can see all kinds of stress, cracks, and things in it. A lot of rust. I mean, I'm sure it was solid. There were still trucks driving over it and everything, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of bridges like that. You know, hanging out in the Bay Area or driving over the Chesapeake Bay or any of those, going to New York, any of those big bridges, still to this day, they freak me right the heck out. I don't know what it is, some kind of weird bridge vertigo. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure I stopped here. One, to point out this cool piece of bridge that's left over, a little piece of Route 66 history over there. Two, to let you know that the Mother Road Museum did in fact reopen here at Casa del Desierto. And three, just to kind of lay out the introduction here of this particular Route 66 trip. As I just mentioned, we've done many other end-to-end Route 66 trips in the past, gotten into all kinds of histories and mysteries of the Mother Road, which we're gonna continue to do until I am no longer physically capable. This particular trip, we're winging it just a little bit. We wanna see what it's like traveling down the Mother Road as a tourist in the year 2026, in the 100th anniversary. Document the experience, see what's changed, what's updated, what's new, what's old. I just wanted to stop here in Barstow to say that if it seems like we're skipping over a lot of the California portion, that's because we're gonna come back this way, and I live here. I'm sure it's the same way for Route 66 travelers who live in Chicago, right? They can't wait to get out of the Chicagoland area and get out on the open road. That's also what it's like for those of us who live in LA, right? We can't wait to get out of that LA traffic, put some desert miles under our tires. By the way, real quickly, I should mention that the Casa del Desierto, the old Barstow Harvey house, has also got a railroad museum inside of it, as well as a parking lot that is open basically 24 hours a day with tons and tons of rolling stock and old locomotives you can climb all over out here. Or, well, you used to be able to climb all over out here. And at most reasonable times of the day, the station building itself is open for a clean restroom, and it's a good stop at any given point when you're traveling through, either on your way back and forth to Las Vegas or going out on a Route 66 trip. Capture a little bit of the romance of the West, you know, because after all, it was the railroad that built the West. In a sense, although, you know, yeah, the covered wagon pioneers would have something to say about that. Most of Route 66 does indeed follow the old railroad tracks that paved the way for the automobile traffic of the future. Plus, who doesn't love checking out a good caboose? Anyway, full disclosure, I was actually tempted to just start the camera rolling once we got to Arizona and skip over California entirely on our way out and just save it all for the way back. But I'm glad that we've stopped to spend some time together here on California's portion of Route 66. Even though we did get sort of started a little later than I usually like to head out in the morning. The only bummer is, London, I feel like you're fated to never see the inside of the Barstow Route 66 Museum. Why not? It's your destiny. It's always closed. Every time we come, it's either closed permanently or reopened and then closed. Anyway, the sun is getting low in the sky, so speaking of getting some desert miles under our tires, we are going to leave beautiful downtown, old town Barstow, and it does have its beautiful, charming old portions. And, get out in the desert, see what else we can see before the sun goes down entirely. Now, even though we are moving quickly through Southern California in this particular adventure, I was out here just about a month and a half ago or something like that, doing a short Route 66 trip out to Arizona. So we've got some recent episodes from this area, including about this, the old Russian House California Welcome Center and Information Center, located right across the street from one of the old original California agricultural inspection stations along Route 66, right? So they'd check you going out of California or into Southern California for, I don't know, invasive species, bugs, produce, whatever. Also famously at the agricultural stations is where they turned away a lot of the Okies fleeing the Dust Bowl. And we talked about these guys, the old prospector signs for Calico Ghost Town. They've been replaced by something very modern, and some people say heinous and awful. I'm not saying that, but some people are definitely saying it, not me. We also showed a little bit of the old downtown mining town of Daggett. There are a lot of little one-off stops in the California desert along the old Mother Road, the old desert portions of Route 66. Unfortunately, a lot of the connecting segments of the old road are still closed to the public because of bridges that washed out during flooding several years ago. A lot of us thought they'd be back for the 100th anniversary, but, and I say this with love for my home state, as I am a Californian, California probably prioritizes Route 66 the least of any of the 8 states that Route 66 goes across. It's not that there's no preservation or no fans of Route 66, and it's not that there aren't people working really hard to preserve it, but it probably has the least amount of preservation, and it feels like the least amount of cooperation from the states and the counties and stuff like that. So I don't know how long those portions of the road are going to be closed, but when they reopen, I would love to do an old road end to end in Southern California. Yeah. Much like this little romantic piece we're driving on now. It used to be full of little 2-lane sections going way out into the desert along the railroad tracks with a bunch of watering stops for the trains that started towns that then became kind of stops for the earliest Route 66 travelers that are now basically nothing out there. All right, well, we pushed the Route 66 fast forward button, which means we got on the interstate for a while here, but that was not our fault. Because as I mentioned, so much of California's old sections of road are still closed. This is part of why, as we stare off into this lovely sunset backwards towards Barstow where we just were, this is part of why I often skip over large parts of California's Route 66. One day, when they restore some parts of this, we'll do a real crazy Route 66 series in California. You know what? Actually, maybe even later this year, when we're home, we'll focus a little more intensely on some California Route 66 history. For now, I'm just stoked that we've broken away from the gravity of Southern California. We're out here watching the sunset just on the edge of Ludlow, California, home of the Ludlow Cafe. It's probably the prime Route 66 attraction here. But in addition to that and these lovely now abandoned sections of Route 66, this town is probably most famous to Route 66 travelers and other desert wanderers for its abandoned buildings, like this one in the old former downtown of Ludlow, which, as you can see in the 360-degree view, really doesn't exist anymore.
I'm still here, though. I'm still in Ludlow.
Oh boy, he sure is. Look at this, some suspicious abandoned luggage on the ground. We got cans of food, and even comfortable mattresses right outside the old Murphy Brothers store out here, right alongside the railroad tracks, right where downtown Ludlow used to be located back when it was just a railroad stop. And if you actually explore down here, you'll see little remnants of old sidewalks and little bits and pieces of foundations of old buildings. This is one of those places that has almost completely disappeared, and the little bits and pieces that were left were removed for safety reasons or pulled away by scrappers over time. Pretty much all that's left downtown is just a few of the walls of the old Murphy Brothers store. I shouldn't just say store, it was a store, a campground, and a motel here along the original alignment of Route 66. I'm remembering correctly. And then it was later moved down to the northern edge of town where the modern Ludlow Cafe is, just a few blocks behind London, sitting in the car there. It's amazing how absolutely different this view is than the old postcard view from back in the days. This was built in the early 1900s when Ludlow was popular as sort of a staging ground for mining operations in the area. They found gold and silver, but also copper and borax out in the surrounding hills, and even eventually uranium as well. So that's what popularized the first round of businesses out here in Ludlow and what would have been the downtown facing the railroad tracks, which would have been your main way in and out of town. Of course, the National Old Trails Highway came through, which later became Route 66. But when Route 66 came through here in 1926, as more and more funding came along to pave it, to widen it, and to handle the increased traffic, as with most places, the main street of the town would go from the railroad tracks down to a wider section of highway. And even though Ludlow remained a mining support town for a long time, as you can see, not only by the Ludlow Motel and the Ludlow Cafe and the modern Chevron station down here on old Route 66, but also the myriad abandoned old filling stations, gas stations, old post offices, and other buildings along the old road tell you that Ludlow quickly became a highway town. And of course, once cars could make it longer between tanks of gas and fill-ups of radiator water, and the classic American road trip faded from common practice, Ludlow went the way of many other sketchy, weird, old desert town in California, abandoned, forlorn, and left to the ravages of time and the desert winds. I've never seen this fence open before. For a long time, I think somebody was trying to make fetch happen at this Gull Wing station and restore it, but it looks like the fence is down and the ravages of time are after this place too. I believe this pile of rubble next door to this Gull Wing old 76 station I'm standing, I believe this was the original Ludlow Cafe out there. I'll look at that in just a second. I believe that was the original Ludlow Cafe when Route 66 was a busy, busy road right here just to the south of us. That building stood out here for years and years and eventually was lost to fire and vandalism. Still a house down there off in the distance. We still have the old post office and motel across the street over the way. But even in my time doing Route 66 over the last 20 years, I've seen a lot of buildings disappear. We're losing them in all 8 of the Route 66 states. But like I say, many of the other states have put in a lot of effort into preserving stuff or building new stuff. I guess with the beaches and Universal Studios and Hollywood and Disneyland and Yosemite and all the things, Route 66 tourism to California is just a drop in the bucket. They really don't care. In terms of the powers that be, I mean, especially about far-flung locations like this. I mean, why bother trying to save this when there's so many other things that the state of California can do that will draw in more money and draw more traffic than the handful of visitors who are going to come out past this? And so the way I understand it, there's just a lot less state grants and stuff being distributed out here in California. So anyway, my point is, come out here and see these old Ludlow filling stations. Look, you can still see the ghost writing there. Gas, generators, regulators, water pumps, fuel pumps. Come out here and see the old Gullwing 76 station from back in the day. Beautiful mid-century architecture. And come out and see this before it's too late as well, the old Ludlow Motel. One of the most commonly photographed abandoned buildings, especially on California's stretches of Route 66. This was indeed an old motel and post office. And this is one of those early motor motels, you know, sort of like that I Love Lucy episode where the guy's the constable and the mayor and the judge and everything else. It kind of did everything. It had a post office and it had little cabins for people to park their cars next to and, you know, basically camp out in a little private cozy cabin along the side of the road. So this would have just been your main office. I believe there were some rooms for rent in there. It would have been the home of the proprietor. Typically speaking, that's commonly the way it was done out in the West, especially along the early US highways, the early days of road travel. They would have had a filling station out here. So you can see this old sign bracket, right, for a light up gas station sign. And then right over there, right across Elliott Street, which is this strip of dirt in front of us, also very often photographed, is this little building right here, which I believe is the last surviving cabin of the old Ludlow Motel. So there's an old postcard of the Ludlow Motel on theroute-66.com, one of the best Route 66 websites, showing the Ludlow Motel and a line of cabins stretching from it towards this last little one over here. As you can see, obviously that is no longer the case today. Absolutely nothing is between. In fact, somebody's plowed up a dirt road in between these two. But yeah, that's what this building, I believe, is one of the last remaining cabins. And the Ludlow Motel is a building we've been inside of many times over the years. It is now getting so unsteady and unsafe. You can basically no longer stand in that thing. More and more of the roof seems to be disappearing. It doesn't look like it's long for this earth unless somebody steps in and at least, you know, braces it up with some wood beams or something. Because you can see the front of the building. Can you see that right there? The front of the building is kind of desperately leaning forward now. Not a good sign. And look at this little cabin. Imagine when this was all clean and brand new with its sort of like tin siding, it's metal siding out here to protect you from the rays of the nuclear desert sun. Imagine pulling up to this and getting your own cozy little cabin here in Ludlow. You're crossing the desert, you're coming all the way from Chicago, you're all weary and tired. And even today, if you're headed westwards, you know, towards the Pacific Ocean, on old Route 66 or even on the interstate, there are no lights for forever. So when you finally see the lights of Ludlow, you're like, oh, thank goodness, some kind of civilization. So I can only imagine pulling your Model T or your old jalopy in here. In the early days of highway travel, I'd be like, oh, not only are we safe and secure, we don't have to camp outside. We got a little cozy cabin here. Anyway, the light is getting too low to really explore Ludlow more and in more depth. We will do it when we come back through California, Route 66 on the back end of this trip when we're going Chicago to LA, or in a separate series when we do focus a lot more on California 66. This is just a warm-up adventure today. We're just out here stretching our legs, kind of wrapping our brain, we're packing up the car and wrapping our brains around like, oh, we're about to spend a couple of weeks out on the mother road. Maybe some side quests, some side adventures as well. It's hard to say because you never know what could happen in Randomland. All right, we're almost done for the day. We've got to drive to the Arizona border tonight, but we're gonna take another portion of old Route 66 because there's something I want to see if we can see. By the way, I'm always in Ludlow in the dark, leaving Southern California, getting through the Orange County and the Riverside County and the kind of eastern half of the Los Angeles metro area's traffic is such a pain. It takes so many hours to leave it. And in fact, I'm always telling people, you wanna do a Route 66 trip, man, You're really going from Barstow to Joliet, right? It's really not about Chicago or LA or really St. Louis, although it's not as bad as the other two I just mentioned. It's those traffic-free sort of open road zones of Route 66, the smaller towns I'm really interested in. Although don't get me wrong, I love Albuquerque and St. Louis and Chicago in its way, and even LA. It's just such a contrast when you're in a major city like Los Angeles or Chicago versus standing out here someplace like this, right? It's just a totally different experiences. And man, see, I'm glad that we did a little bit of snooping around today instead of just blasting for the Arizona border, because I'm getting pumped. This is pumping me up for the road ahead. Speaking of the road ahead, we got to get going on the road ahead if we're going to see what I hope we can see. One last desperate blast down the old mother road in quest of a sign. We need to see a sign. Man, that's cool. Oh man, darkness came down on us like a steel trap out here. There is no light, but the trains going by on Route 66, those lone, solitary, powerful, fast trains, all in it, through the desert night, until all of a sudden, behold, a sign! We're back in Amboy, California, home of possibly the most iconic neon sign on Route 66. Welcome to Roy's Motel and Cafe. Just look at that, dude. Look at that huge, epic, mid-century modern sweep of the roof there on the old motel office, the old cabins beyond the neon sign, and what a neon sign. It literally does not get more iconic than that when you're talking Route 66. And although I have been out here many times, dozens of times, literally over the years, believe it or not, this is the first time I have ever looked upon the lit Roy's Motel and Cafe sign with my own eyes. Amboy, like many other towns in this part of the desert, was started as just a watering stop for the railroad, and it never really grew to be that big, but it was when Route 66 came through here that it had the most life. A couple of cafes and motels and restaurants. They built a big high school out of here. Very busy during the war years with lots of trucks and traffic, a lot of soldiers training out here in the desert. Of course, obviously the uranium mining and other stuff I was mentioning in Ludlow made this kind of a busier town than it ever has been since. But once this place was bypassed by the interstate highway being built in the 1970s, it never recovered. There's still a tiny little post office across the street, and thanks to the owner of Juan Pollo, Albert Okura, of recent memory, who saved this place, Roy's Motel and Cafe is still open, or at least the actual cafe building and the filling station, the gas station over here that London and I are going to go to in a second if they're still open. You know, Albert Okura had plans to eventually reopen this as something. There's actually a more modern motel building behind the old roadside cabins. Once again, you see the early Route 66 history with the cabins there. Look at that. It's the neon sign. Imagine, like we were saying earlier, imagine coming from the east especially, all the nothing, all the darkness, all like we were just driving through, just nothing. And all of a sudden you see the soft, beautiful glow of neon. You see that beautiful sign, cafe, there's food, you see gas station signs, and that beautiful word right there, motel, somewhere clean to lay your head, get a little drink of water, maybe take a hot shower. Absolutely amazing. This whole place was pretty much a ghost town, pretty much completely abandoned until Mr. Okura kind of stepped in and kind of revived Roy's, at least as a traveler stop along Route 66. But for years, for decades and decades, this sign was unlit. Still beautiful, but people came out to photograph it mostly in the day. I mean, why bother coming out here at night if there was nothing to see, right? But in 2019, shortly after London's first visit to Amboy, right? And we took you to Route 66 when you were just a little wee thing. We went out to the Grand Canyon and stuff, and we stopped here in Amboy at night, right at sunset. And this thing hadn't been relit yet because it was in November of 2019 that they relit the Roy's sign. And I, unfortunately, was nowhere near being in town. I don't just mean in Amboy, I mean in LA. So I missed the big relighting ceremony, and I've never managed to come back through here at night and see this thing lit up in its full glory. And it is absolutely magnificent. Now, the camera that I'm using is not particularly nighttime friendly, right? But as I back up over here, I think even with this dorky camera, you can get a sense of just how freaking epic that looks. And here with the naked eye, let me tell you, I can see a whole bunch of stars behind this thing. It's almost like that scene in Toy Story. For some reason, this is popping in my head. That scene in Toy Story where they first get to Pizza Planet and you see the whole sky lit up with stars and then that beautiful Pizza Planet neon. I love that. The mid-century modern motel office there, the old cafe in the background, the neon sign, and best of all, behind London over there against the cafe, a Ford Aerostar, my first car. Now that is a classic. None of the cabins out here have been restored yet, or any of the motel rooms behind the cabins for visitors to stay in. I don't know if they'll ever be restored to that point. I tried to get permission when Albert was still alive to come and stay inside of one of these cabins overnight, but they were very uncomfortable with that. They were telling me about scorpions and snakes and all kinds of stuff. Like, we'd really rather you didn't. And that's when like nobody was out here at night, right? So I thought maybe I could just do it anyways, but they are really well preserved. Let me just pull out my phone flashlight there. And they have been cleaned up over the years in terms of, they're standing quite firmly out here and looking like you could habitate them. I remember being out here one year when they were redoing the plumbing and there were big ditches across the parking lot. So they've definitely worked on the power and the water out here. I still hope that one day some part of Roy's Motel will open up for visitors to stay, whether in a camping capacity, whether in the more mid-century hotel, or even potentially these cabins, even just as a fun, just random overnight stay. I'll tell you something funny though, as we're standing out here and all I can think of is the movie Cars, right? Which was definitely inspired more by the town of Seligman, but I also think partially by the town of Amboy, the railroad crossing being so close, all this different stuff. London and I were standing out here in front of the sign when we first pulled up, and a minivan with 4 Italian dudes came up and they all rolled down the windows and leaned out of the car and they're like, well, Los Angeles. And we're sitting there like, is this a scam? Are they about to pull us into the car or what out in the middle of the desert, you know? No, they were genuinely lost and they were like, no internet. I don't know how, they were not impressed by this sign. They were not trying to do Route 66 like most Italians in this part of the desert. They were genuinely completely lost and confused. Amboy is a hard place to get to by accidents. I don't know where they were going or where they were coming from, but imagine just seeing this like, yes, they were doing exactly what I just said. It's the old story. They were like, yes, salvation. Look, there's some men. We can ask them for directions. It was creepy though, just because there was 4 of them. All the windows were down. I was like, oh, they're Italian. They're fine. They didn't speak much English, but I talk to them like this, and we understand the universal sign language there of my people. Oh, look at that, dude. That is so rad. All these bats flying around, eating all the mosquitoes around that thing. That is freaking awesome. And other than the two employees of the cafe out there chatting on a smoke break, it is, and the occasional train, it is absolutely dead silent out here. Nothing but the crunch of gravel underfoot and the sound of a vast region of nothing. On the open road, my friends. Now I feel like we've finally begun. We've finally begun our trip down the old mother road, America's highway, America's main street. We're back on Route 66. Okay, I know this is a family show and we keep it clean around here. And my mom watches this, so I don't want to get in trouble. But the only word I can think of to describe what I'm looking at is bitchin'. I love it, dude. All right, guys. We will be back for many, many more adventures along Route 66. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. And if we don't meet our demise, we'll have plenty of Mother Road adventures coming up for the 100th anniversary of Route 66. But for now, I think we've done all that we can do, which means we've done our duty. We're gonna drive a couple 100 more miles into the darkness over there, find a place to lay our heads down and hotel and sleep well. If you wanna help support the journey, we've got Patreon, we've got merch, we've got a ton of hot sauce that just showed up at my house right before we left. I signed a grip of books and we have a brand new Randomland pin available for you at store.randomland.com. I don't even want to show you what it looks like yet. Let that be a surprise. We'll show that on the next one. Check it out, my friends. Until then, we'll see you in the next one. open, dang you. Yay, freedom, Route 66, adventure, here we come, we're going on Route 66, we are traveling, we're going forward, we're going to do it, we're going to Route 66, London. Get your kicks on the Route 66, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, stop sign, we gotta stop. Stop the adventure, stop. All right, look at this. Something's about to happen right now. Nope. Right now. No. It's gonna happen right now. I thought it was gonna happen. It's not happening. Why isn't it happening? What's going on? Oh, look at that. We got here right in time. So apparently you got to be out here pretty much at sunset. They close this place up at 8:30, and if you ain't here, you ain't going to see that sign lit up. Look at that. That's how it looked. For years and years and years when I'd come out here at night, that's how it looked. You can see why there was no point. Oh, that sign is so bitchin'. That is so cool. Okay, I shouldn't say that word. Kids, don't repeat that. All right, go home and sleep well.